So the title of this video is The RC Pilot and the FAA Recreational Part 107, a discussion. Good morning, my name is Tim, and in this video I'm going to read out the title, and I do have notes on this because there's a lot of information. I want to make sure that I get it right because we're talking about the FAA laws, regulations. So what I'm going to do is just give you my thoughts on the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, how the FAA is getting linked up much more closely to radar control models and drones, the history of how we got to this point, and my thoughts on RC flight today in 2020. It's December 2020 when we're making this recording and beyond, because there's going to be a lot of changes coming on board. The two big items that affect RC modelers, hobbyists, we're going to have to take a test here at some point to fly our models, even at a club, and the issue of remote ID for all unmanned aerial vehicles. My background to discuss these matters: I've been a radar control model airplane pilot since 1973, off and on with work, etc. Pretty active now. I am a civilian pilot, flight instructor, and most recently an airline pilot flying the Boeing 777. I've been a military crew member as an electronic warfare officer and therefore Phantom for 10 years. And most recently, I just got, this was 3 days ago, an additional certificate from the FAA. I'm now officially, this is my temporary airman certificate, I'm officially a Small Unmanned Aircraft System pilot. This is a rating by the FAA to fly small unmanned aircraft, the so-called Part 107, and I'll explain why I got this later on. Some of you may have your Part 107 certificates. Let's talk a little bit about the FAA, or the Federal Aviation Agency. As RC modelers, and I'm primarily a recreational RC modeler, we have very little intersection with the FAA. So let's define what the FAA's mission is, their history, and how that is becoming much more closely aligned with what we're doing as RC modelers. First of all, the mission of the Federal Aviation Administration is to provide the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. One sentence. So what the FAA wants to do is safely integrate new users and new technologies into the aviation system. So this is precisely what's happening with drones, GPS, long-range flights, new users, new technologies into the aviation system. And what they mean by the aviation system, the FAA is responsible in the United States for what they call the National Airspace System, the NAS. Anybody who flies in the National Airspace System, civilians, RC pilots, military, the FAA is the overall authority that can tell them what they can do, what they can't do. They can even shut down military exercises if the FAA deals is going to be a threat to safety for civilian aircraft operations. So because we're flying in the National Airspace System, the minute we take off, we are going to intersect with the FAA at some point. Let's talk a little bit about the history of the FAA. So clearly, nothing happened to the Wright brothers flew in 1903. But you think back in those days, there was no electrical system, no radios, people just flew. Radios in airplanes really didn't start becoming common until the late 1920s, early 1930s. Therefore, by definition, there's no air traffic control. It's just see and avoid, fly where you want, etc. And so there was starting to be enough passengers flying, so now there's safety concerns with DC-3s, etc., that in 1938, the Civil Aeronautics Act was set up to establish the CAA to have some oversight of this very recent emergence of people actually buying tickets to fly on airliners. World War II started, of course, in 1941. All the focus was on that. There was essentially no civilian airliner flights stateside during the war. But after the war in 1945, all of a sudden there were a lot of airplanes that were quite capable. They were going higher, faster. The Brits were instituting jet service with the British Comet, and the system of the CAA just couldn't keep up with these rapid advances in technology, speed, capabilities, and the numbers of people that were flying on these airliners. As is often the case, what happened to spark further action from the government? There was a tragic accident. There was just a terrible air mishap. What had happened on June 30th, 1956, there was a TWA Super Constellation, a 4-engine propeller-powered aircraft, a United DC-7, another propeller-powered airliner, And these two airliners collided. There was a midair right over the middle of the Grand Canyon at altitude. 128 people were killed in this crash. It was just a literal midair with people just getting killed. And the day was a beautiful blue sky day, and both airliners were flying under visual flight rules. Visual flight rules means that you're not under instrument control. You look out the window to avoid other people. The reason they were under VFR, there was literally no radar coverage over that section of the country because there wasn't that much flight. But this happened, and so people just started looking around, my goodness. And so that led 2 years later to the FAA signing into law on August 23rd, 1958. The Federal Aviation Administration came into force. Now keep in mind, when the FAA was first stood up in 1958, 8 months before that, in December 1957, that was the first flight of Boeing's 707 airliner. So the 707 was actually flying for 8 months before the FAA even existed, so clearly something needed to be done. So once the FAA came into existence, now there was a central government agency that could take care of things going on within the aviation world. The FAA does a lot of things. So after it stood up, things that happened over the next few years was hijacking. They had to figure out rules for what to do with hijacking. The noise of jets, pollution, delays at airports fell right to the FAA. The Airline Deregulation Act of 1978, all tied to the National Airspace System. So to do the FAA's job to provide safety, they do a lot of things. It covers pilots. Everybody from a Piper Cub pilot to United captain on a 787 is certificated by the FAA for a license. Flight attendants come under the FAA. The mechanics that work in these aircraft have to be certified by the FAA. The ATC controllers that do such a wonderful job of controlling our aircraft and our system are FAA certified. And the aircraft manufacturers, Boeing and Gulfstream, they can build a jet. It's all well and good until the FAA says that has an airworthiness certificate and in our opinion is safe to carry passengers. It doesn't go anywhere. To show you the reach of the FAA even works with foreign companies building airliners. China is working very hard now to build their equivalent of a 737. For China to have any hope of selling that plane outside of China, it's got to have an FAA airworthiness certificate. So the FAA incorporation, believe it or not, has inspectors, engineers in China advising them what to do to meet an eventual FAA airworthiness certificate for that Chinese airliner. We've had a good discussion on the FAA, so I think you can see that it's an organization that's important, does a lot of things, and it can expand its duties as necessary to take on new tasks. So let's talk a little bit about the history of radio control flight and how we get up to the point where we're now coming to very close coordination oversight. Well, we are under oversight with my Part 107 certificate of the FAA. So when radio control flight, first practical radio control flight happened, it was in the 1950s with the Reeds control. Eventually you had proportional. So practical radio control model airplanes were flying in the 50s, 60s, up through the late 1990s, I would say. These models were fairly large. They weren't super micro size. They all had gas engines, and because they were fairly complicated, there was no such thing as an almost ready to fly model, really. The activity of RC models tend to focus on their local club. So there was this thing called a community-based organization, which you're going to hear about a lot with the FAA, that kind of oversaw model flying because everybody was at a club. And what I mean by that, there weren't too many RC modelers that took their model down to New York City or out in the middle of nowhere and just flew it. They flew in clubs. So modelers flew their planes at clubs, and there was really no involvement for the FAA to speak of. The FAA knew we were there. There weren't really too many of us. We stayed away from very busy areas like New York City, Terminal Control Area, Atlanta. We were off on the side. We flew low. And what the premise was that allowed that to go on without too much FAA interference was see and avoid. So even today, when you are flying visual flight rules on an airplane, to include airliners, the idea is you're looking out the window, you see somebody, you avoid them. That is the word for how to maintain separation. Even if you're under an instrument flight plan, the controllers can separate you from known other instrument traffic. There's no guarantee of separation from visual traffic, hence the term see and avoid. So when we were flying our models from our field, we had line of sight of the models at all time. If there was another airplane out there, we could maneuver our models to avoid the airplanes, thus seeing a void. We were generally below 400 feet. We just weren't a factor that required a lot of oversight to allow safe operations of the national airspace system. Drones changed that whole approach, and what I mean by a drone, and I'll put a picture up here, is what we're familiar with, like 4 arms, 4 or more electric motors, and it tends to take off and land vertically. Drones all kind of happen at the same time. They come completely assembled, they fly very well, they use powerful brushless electric motors, lithium polymer batteries, and with GPS and the capabilities of the drones, all of a sudden there could be a lot of remote controlled or unmanned air vehicles in the national airspace system, people that might not have linkages to a club with a safety code, safety oversight of club flying, and because these drones are independent of use, they can go to a lot of out-of-the-way places to take their pictures, to do whatever they want to do with the drones. So what this means for us as RC model pilots is the public is becoming much more aware of unmanned aerial vehicles. It could be neighbors, seeing them flying around in their backyards. I've taken a lot of trips. Every castle in Europe has a sign, no UAVs, because people literally bring UAVs in their backpack to take pictures of the castles. And we've all seen cases, very serious cases, where, for example, there'd be a national disaster area with one of those terrible forest fires in the Northwest. Aircraft to try to put out the fire, flying around, picking up people, they have to call off operations because there's a drone in the area. And these drones are big enough that they are a hazard to flight. So because all this is happening, people are taking notice, complaints are coming in, and more importantly for us as RC modelers, Congress is starting to get information that drones or RC models could be a problem. And the one they're going to turn to rectify this or do something about it is the FAA. It's important to go over one definition because you're going to hear the term, the word aircraft a lot, and it's an important term. So what the FAA definition of an aircraft is, and this goes into their regulations and everything, an aircraft is a vehicle that is able to fly by gaining support from the air. So some common examples of an aircraft are airplanes. A Piper Cub, a United 787, is an aircraft because it flies. A helicopter is an aircraft. Gliders, paramotors, hot air balloons are all examples of aircraft. So when the FAA puts a UAS, an unmanned aircraft system, that applies to fixed wings, RC models like what I fly, as well as drones are all considered UAS. So when you see drone, usually that's shorthand for the quadcopters, etc. But UAS, which is on my Part 107 license, also applies to RC models. So that's how the FAA looks at us with our model airplanes. As I mentioned before, the FAA with drones, with the complaints, they're very aware of these drones. Where the FAA comes in, they want people to fly drones, they're happy with that, but when it starts to become a safety issue, when the drones could impact the safe operation of airliners, sporting events, the public, the FAA will potentially get involved. But the question is, how do they get involved? The way the FAA gets involved is they respond to an act of Congress that writes the law. So Congress obviously pays for the FAA. This is an example of the law. I'll put it up here so you can see this. It's available on the FAA website. This is an official 115th Congress, United States of America, second session, blah, blah, blah. This is a law. The title is the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018. So this is the act. It's a huge act that gives the money for the FAA, but more importantly, and by the way, this law, if you print it out, if you look at it on the computer, it's 469 pages long. And what will happen is, under the authorizations, again, this is law that they're allowed to do. They talk about things, funding of FAA programs, passenger facility charges, that's charging airliners to use an airport, improvement programs, airport noise, environmental streamlining, flight standard reform, it goes on and on and on. But what will happen down here, I'm not going to read the whole thing, Subtitle B, Unmanned Aircraft Systems. So this is Congress telling the FAA what to do about our RC models and drones. Section 341, definitions, integration of civil unmanned aircraft systems in the national airspace system, update on FAA comprehensive plan, small unmanned aircraft in the Arctic, small unmanned aircraft safety standards, exception for limited recreational operations on unmanned aircraft. It goes on and on. So this is law, and what happens is the FAA is obligated to follow law, figure out what to do, and write that into the Code of Federal Aviation Regulations. So again, just to highlight the importance of the FAA, this is a multi-page. I just have a few here. And what it is, it's a statement of Daniel L. Well, the Deputy Administrator of the FAA, before the Committee on Transportation Infrastructure, and blah, 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 into the House, just explaining, okay, you pass this law, this is how we're going to go about doing what you asked us to do. If there's any questions, let us know. So there's aircraft certification flight standards, there's flight attendant duty rest periods is covered by the law, secondary cockpit barriers to keep people from breaking into the cockpits, pilot duty rest periods, etc. But over here is unmanned aircraft systems. And it says the 2018 Act that I just showed you devoted considerable attention to the FAA's continued work on the integration of UAS into the national airspace system. The points below highlight some of the agency's important work in this area. Remote ID. To further the objective of integrating UAS into the national airspace system, Congress recognizes the importance of remote identification when enacted. It goes on and on about that. I'll talk about remote ID at the end of this video because that's going to be the big challenge for going on from here. Furthermore, the FAA is telling Congress remote identification is fundamental to both safety and security of U.S. operations. Remote ID is necessary for routine beyond visual line of sight operations, operations over people, package deliveries, etc. So keep in mind, I'm talking in this video about us modelers flying UASs, RC models and drones. You'll see when you get into the registration thing here coming up shortly, what covers us are drones that weigh more than 0.55 pounds, that's about 8 ounces, and are less than 55 pounds. That's where we're allowed to fly. More than that, there's all sorts of special exemptions per the FAA. We're not going to worry about that. But again, there's a lot of information that is going on in the FAA and Congress over what they tend to do for us. And so the purpose of this video is to make sure that we're aware of this, because it's going to start intersecting with us. And at the end, I'll give you what I think is the best way ahead to deal with this. Because I've been flying for a number of years, I've been intersected with the FAA. When I first took my written test to be a private pilot in 1973, you went into the FAA office, took it, you got the results back in mail. Today it's all a computer, instant results. It's really quite remarkable. But the FAA, in my opinion, has done a very good job with their their website. It is www.faa.gov. Couldn't be much easier. Let's take a very short look at the FAA website, and specifically the UAV portion of the FAA website. This is the FAA's website, faa.gov. Very good website, clean presentation. Here are the top topics: coronavirus. The unmanned aircraft systems is located here. You can see this, what types of drones do you fly, recreational or commercial operations. So we can look at the recreational flyers. Here's all the information I discussed in the video, what you can do, what you can't do, with a lot of extra very helpful links to include changes coming to you, the recreational flyer. Going back to the UAS homepage, there is a section on commercial operations, part 107. Learn the rules, getting a certificate. That'll be a subject of a follow-on video. Note also top tasks for unmanned systems and the drone zone. This is the section of the FAA where you register your drone or RC model. It can be exception for recreational flyers, part 107. There's specific instructions how to do that all online. Going back to the recreational flyers, again, things that are helpful with websites, just everything you need to know. As I mentioned earlier, the use of very well-flying electric-powered drones changed everything, because now people can get these very quickly, not be tied into a club, and there's a lot of people that make money from these drones. They could be taking pictures of real estate agents, they could be inspecting crops, all sorts of things. It's really thrilling to see the amount of work being done on this, but they're in the national airspace system, as I discussed. So again, this printout from the FAA website, these are unmanned aerial systems. Remember, RC models and drones by the numbers. The FAA says a few decades ago, drones were confined to science fiction, notions of the future. Today, unmanned aircraft systems or drones are rapidly becoming part of our everyday lives. Notice they keep using the word drones because that's the audience they're at. The FAA is not too worried about RC modelers because we tend to operate out of clubs, but drones, modelers, all part of UAS. UAS is a quickly increasing numbers of complexity, blah, blah, blah. So here's a snapshot of the current state of drones in the United States. Right now, there's registered 1,751,000 drones. That's registered with the FAA. They have signed up, they have a registration number. 512,000 are commercial drones that are registered. 1,235,000 recreational drones are registered. And that Part 107 that I showed you, the remote pilots certified, 204,000 pilots are certified so far. That's a lot of people. The next important step, it's a must-do per the FAA, is to register your drone or RC model. Not every RC model has to be registered. The ones that have to be registered have to weigh 8 ounces or more, 0.55 pounds, or less than 55 pounds. If you have a very small, lightweight Christmas present drone or Radian glider, something of that nature that weighs less than 8 ounces, it doesn't have to be registered. So the majority of model aircraft that weigh more than half a pound up to 55 pounds have to be registered. So what we do to register the aircraft is, this is a printout of the page from the FAA website you saw on the demonstration of the video of the site. Just Google FAA register your drone, this will come right up. And what you'll need, you can do this all online, is an email address, a mailing address, and a debit or credit card, because it costs $5 for a 3-year registration for recreational flyers. You fill out the form, it happens all automatically. The other thing is you've got to be 13 years of age or older to register a drone. So if, like say you're a 10-year-old, you got a drone that weighs a pound for Christmas and you want to register it, you're going to have to get a older family member over 13 years old, brother, sister, parent, to register it, because what the registration will do will give you a registration number, just like a license plate number in a car, and that number has to be put on your drone. You can write on permanent marker, you can put it with a sticker, it has to be on the drone, so that if the FAA were to come out and look at the drone or RC model, they see the registration number. Just like your car, you have to have tags on your car. These are essentially tags for RC model airplanes that are over 8 ounces, below 55 pounds. And the final thing is 13 years of age, a U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Once you register, and again, the FAA website I think is very good, you're going to get this small UAS certificate of registration. So over here is your actual registration number, and then I'm going to go over these instructions over here, what is tied to this. So again, the certificate holder, the UAS certificate number that we put outside, and when it was expired. So mine is good till December 12th of 2023. At that time, another $5, all online, it'll be extended. So this is a proverbial fine print. So just let me go over that very quickly, because this is what the FAA is expecting even me and my local RC club field to comply with. So remember, we're operating the National Airspace System. The FAA has given us an exception for recreational flyers. A recreational flyer, I'm not making any money, I'm just doing it for fun. Have to register by drone, fly only for recreational purposes. That means you're not making any money. You're not taking pictures for a real estate agent or helping out a farmer. Follow the safety guidelines of a community-based organization, i.e. a club under the Academy of Model Aeronautics. Keep your drone within the visual line of sight or use a visual observer. Give way, do not interfere with any manned aircraft. Get prior authorization before operating controlled airspace. So I'm just going to touch upon this, but the FAA and the National Airspace System, airspace is either controlled or uncontrolled. Controlled airspace means simply the FAA can tell planes what to do on that, everything from a control tower to radar controlled over the United States. If we're below 400 feet and at least 5 miles from an airport, generally speaking, in the United States, we're flying in uncontrolled airspace, but that's just for your background information. fly at or below 400 feet in uncontrolled airspace, comply with all airspace restrictions, I'll get to that in a little bit, and pass an aeronautical knowledge and safety test. Well, you might say, I haven't passed an aeronautical knowledge and safety test. That's in the language of the bill. Because this is such a huge deal for RC model pilots, the FAA is working very closely with the modeling flying community to figure out what that test is going to be. We don't have to take it now. In a year or 2 or 3 down the road, we will probably have to take some sort of test to fly our model airplanes even at a club field. This is an example from the website again about how to label your drone with your registration certificate. I'll put it up on the top. Basically, you have a number. It could be an engraving, permanent label, permanent marker. Previously, you could put it inside a battery compartment. This has to be on the outside of the aircraft. Let's talk a little bit now about recreational flyers and modeler community-based organizations. Again, from the FAA website, the title that I just read you is Modeler Community-Based Organizations. The FAA doesn't want to impose any more restrictions and conditions than necessary. They like to partner with groups that seem to have some level of safety awareness, just because the objective is not to crush us as modelers, but to just have safe flight operations. The Academy of Model Aeronautics is viewed as the organization that can represent modelers with their clubs. There's a safety code. We demonstrated over decades that we are concerned about safety. So this is the key interface organization for us as RC modelers with the FAA to include drones. And so what the FAA says is there's a law that I discussed earlier that describes how, when, and where you fly drones for recreational purposes. You're considered a recreational user if you fly your drone for fun. Important to know when you fly, etc. So again, this just kind of recaps what we talked about, marking in drones, recreational purposes, below 400 feet. It also goes into some more specifics on controlled airspace, talking about prior authorization for Class B, C, D, and E, how to use various websites. There is an app put out by the FAA called Before You Fly. It's very easy to use on your phone to tell you exactly what type of airspace you're in, keep it inside of a visual sight. Notice you're allowed to fly at night as long as you have lighting so that you can see it. Never fly over any person, moving vehicle. Don't fly under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and don't operate your drone in a careless and reckless manner. Careless and reckless manner is worth keeping in the back of your mind. That is a very standard thing the FAA has used for manned operations. They're not quite sure what you did. If you can't point to a precise regulation you violated, careless and reckless operation can very often carry the day to convict you. You could lose your certificate, fines, and jail time if it was egregious. So continuing on this, it has changes coming in the future, again from the FAA website. The law also requires drone operators to pass an online aeronautical knowledge and safety test and carry proof of test passage. Now, I did this with my Part 107 because of a business issue. This applies to people just flying Sunday afternoon at the club. And what the FAA continues, the FAA is in the future going to issue guidance on how it will recognize community-based organizations, that's the AMA, and the FAA is incrementally rolling out these features and requirements. So in other words, there's no test right now. We're figuring out how to do it. We'll let you know at appropriate time. The AMA will let us know completely when and how we're going to have to do that. I learned when I took my Part 107 test 3 days ago, the idea of the test is just to make you aware of things like airspace, uncontrolled airspace, how to read the height of a tower, just things that are necessary to safely fly your drone if you're in the same airspace as manned aircraft. However, for the recreational flyers, there's rules passed by that law that we may not be aware of. For example, there is on the FAA website a section on security-sensitive airspace restrictions. And what it says is drones, to include RC models, are prohibited from flying over designated national security sensitive facilities. Operations are prohibited from the ground up to 400 feet, blah, blah, blah. So some examples are military bases, national landmarks, Statue of Liberty, Hoover Dam, Mount Rushmore, certain critical infrastructures such as nuclear power plants. There's actually a portion of the FAA website where you can type in the Statue of Liberty, whatever, and it will show you exactly where it is. Just as an example, I did this for the Marine Corps Air Station at Cherry Point, North Carolina. So what will happen is these red circles are where you can't fly. They're probably some sort of bombing ranges. And on here is quite interesting because It has UAS flight restrictions from the Department of Defense, the Marine Corps, the base is Cherry Point. The reason is national security, there's an FAA ID, and there's a command duty officer with a phone number that you can call, surface to 400 feet. So this is going on. What this means is if you were to fly a drone over Cherry Point airspace, this is how they gig you because you're in restricted airspace without permission. In line with the previous restrictions, stadium and sporting events. What the FAA says, flying drones in and around stadiums is prohibited starting 1 hour before, ending 1 hour after the scheduled time of any of the following events: Major League Baseball, National Football League, Division I football, Sprint Cup, IndyCar, Champ Series races. Specifically, UAS operations are prohibited within a radius of 3 nautical miles of the stadium or venue. This is the law. The final two things I want to talk about are the upcoming aeronautical knowledge and safety tests that recreational flyers are going to have to take, and a little bit of my thoughts on life of remote ID, because this is getting a lot of people very excited. So again, from the FAA, on the aeronautical knowledge and safety test, which again I took for the 107, which is a separate discussion, this is for Sunday afternoon flyers. So the FAA's reauthorization bill introduced new rules for how, when, and where you fly your drone for recreational purposes. The law requires all recreational flyers must pass a knowledge and safety test, which we haven't done, but the test is being developed in 3 phases. Test content, the FAA with input from drone stakeholders has developed the content for the knowledge test. 2, development of requirements for knowledge test administrators with input from the drone community. Where are you going to take this test? Do you have to go to an airport? Can it be done online? And finally, the selection of knowledge test administrators. So what had happened, the FAA on September 17th of 2020 issued a request for information seeking input on this test on what the heck to do on all this stuff. And these are some of the organizations, there's about 20 of them, that are involved with the FAA on developing this test that everybody has a chance to provide input. Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, the Drone Launch Academy, Science Applications International Corporation, Horizon Hobby, Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Coach, King Schools, that's John and Martha King, Unmanned Safety Institute, the First Person View Freedom Coalition, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, a huge organization for pilots, the Academy of Model Aeronautics, the Drone Racing League. So they're all working together on this, and this is just a very hard task. They're trying to come up with something that makes sense, is executable, but we have a voice in that through the AMA. You've heard me mention a bit on the Part 107. This is when you operate your drones in further of business. The reason I had to get my Part 107 is my videos are on YouTube, and my YouTube channel is monetized. But there's a lot of people that very nicely make their living from drones. What will happen is you will get a pilot certificate for unmanned air operations. So you are a certificated pilot. Because there's so much involved in the Part 107, I decided to make a separate video on that. So you'll see that, I'm going to call it the average RC pilot in Part 107, what I went through, what the background is of 107, etc. The final thing I want to do is a little bit of an editorial comment on UAS remote identification. And this is the idea that there's something on our drones or RC modelers, piece of electronics, where they show up on FAA radar scopes and other aircraft to know where we are, okay? And so the FAA, again, this is from the FAA website, drones are fundamentally changing aviation. FAA is fully committed to integrate drones into the national airspace system, etc. So what is remote ID? It's the ability of a UAS in flight to provide identification information that can be received by other parties. Notice received by other parties is other aircraft and ground stations. What will happen typically is the drone will get a GPS signal, so it knows where it is. It'll know its altitude from GPS. It'll be able to broadcast that to ground controllers and other aircraft. Will just show up in the national airspace system. Why do we need it? Remote ID would assist the FAA, law enforcement, and federal security agencies when a UAS appears to be flying in an unsafe manner where the drone is not allowed to fly. So this is a really big deal. So right now there's a notice of proposed rulemaking because this is going to be a very big thing. There's a comment period. AMA is very much involved in this. There is a remote ID cohort that's advising the FAA. And what's next? Remote ID is the next step to enable safe, routine drone operations across our nation, the capability to enhance safety, blah, blah, blah. So it's coming in. It could be years down the road. We don't know what's going to happen for us. My guess is community-based organizations are going to come to our rescue. If we can demonstrate to the FAA that we have a model club at this location, this name, this information, the elected officers, etc., the FAA is going to allow us to operate in that club environment below 400 feet line of sight. I think that's going to be allowed, I think, but we don't know. Drone operators going outside of club areas is going to be a different discussion. The issue, of course, is it's going to be money potentially to put these things on board. It's been my experience with aviation that the cost of these types of things come down drastically. We don't know at this point. In my view, it's not really worth getting too spun up about at this point because I'm relying on the Academy of Model Aeronautics. Everybody who flies an RC modeler should be a member of this organization. The Model Aviation magazine is the best one out there. What will happen is there is a AMA Government Affairs Committee that is on this all the time. People in Washington building relationships, having these meetings. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the AMA Government Affairs team continues to advocate for a common sense solution to remote ID. That's the first sentence of this whole thing. They talk about registrations and all that. So the AMA is totally plugged into this, is aware of what we need to do. The one must do right now is registration of your drone. So if it's expiring, you have to renew it. Part 107, people pretty much know who they are, so they're plugged into the FAA system. For the recreational flyer, the big change coming in are two things really, the need for an online test and remote ID in the future. So just the idea is to stay tuned, and when there are significant developments, I'll be sure to update this channel with those developments. Thank you very much for spending time going through this. The FAA is here for our good, it's for safety. We all fly in airliners to go to Disney World, overseas travel, whatever. We want safe travel, and this is just part of the evolution of safe travel, bringing in the modeler community, the UAS community to safely operate in the national airspace system.